Let's see how it sounds.
Okay.
12 years old. That's the average age of initial entry into the commercial sex industry. It's a sick game of power and control, much like domestic violence, controlling their every move, slowly isolating them from normalcy, reality, and safety.
Human trafficking is happening right here in Rock County.
This isn't just a problem somewhere else. All 72 counties and all 12 tribes in Wisconsin have reported cases of sex trafficking.
This is a crime that is incredibly difficult to quantify, truly hidden in plain sight.
In movies, trafficking victims are kidnapped by strangers off the streets. But in reality, the vast majority of human trafficking is committed by someone the victim knows and trusts.
They might be intimate partners, members of a gang, business owners, or upstanding community members.
They can even be members of their own family.
Human trafficking is an equal opportunity crime. It doesn't discriminate by race, gender, where you live, or economic status.
Human trafficking knows no bounds and can affect anyone, anywhere.
Human trafficking is not a choice.
Any youth involved in a sex act for anything of value, even food or a place to stay, is the victim of human trafficking.
There is no such thing as a child prostitute. This is called child sexual abuse, and it's illegal.
These crimes are difficult to investigate. They thrive in the darkness of vulnerability, silence, shame, and intimidation. But together, we can prevent trafficking by recognizing the signs before victimization even occurs.
Traffickers intentionally target youth that are vulnerable and then identify themselves as helpers.
Those most vulnerable are youth with a history of trauma, LGBTQ youth, and youth from homes with substance abuse.
While we're hoping that I'll come back up, I'll just add that
Or fearful of maltreatment. Youth can be solicited through websites and social media platforms.
Watch for signs of psychological or physical abuse. Starvation, lack of sleep, torture, isolation, broken bones, bruises, dental problems, multiple sexually transmitted infections, forced pregnancies, and abortions. These can all be indicators.
Traffickers may lure victims with money, cell phones, and clothes.
Human trafficking is often a hidden crime. Victims may be afraid to come forward or seek help.
The only way not to find this problem in a community is to simply not look for it.
The Rock County Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force believes all youth in Rock County deserve the right to be safe.
It starts with community responsibility.
Create positive and healthy relationships with youth.
Become informed, share the information, and most importantly, if you see something,
Say something.
Say something.
say something.
If you need help or see a possible human trafficking incident, don't wait. Call 211 anywhere in Wisconsin or your local law enforcement.
So everybody knows what 911 is. What 211 is, if you're not familiar with it, it's through the United Way of Wisconsin and is basically a one-stop shop for community resources. And they have a lot of training and a lot of information and resources that can be provided for a trafficking situation and are able to put people who want to provide information in touch with law enforcement so that we can do our investigations from there.
So our definition nationwide, and in the video Penny talked about it, anything that a trafficker can use that can provide something that a youth doesn't have, like food, shelter, clothing, that can then be turned into coercing them into activities that they feel that they have to do in order to survive. We see a lot of survival sex in Rock County for a place to stay, help pay the rent, that kind of thing with our youth. And so traffickers are really very masterful at picking out what vulnerabilities are for youth and then using those to control them. So it's not always an exchange for money, and the money that is exchanged never really goes to that person being trafficked, but the trafficker themselves. Anything else to add there? Okay, so we have the next 3 slides show you a lot of information about vulnerabilities and risk factors. And what we like to talk about is how to put multiple risk factors together to maybe see something through a different lens when we're looking at our youth. So our goal with these trainings is really always to give you enough information that you might just start looking at things a little differently. But it's also really important that we mention this is an equal opportunity crime. It knows no gender, no socioeconomic status. Any youth who has any kind of vulnerability, whether you come from a solid 2-parent family home or you have a single parent, any youth at some point might have a vulnerability that would make them a perfect target for a trafficker. Do you guys want to point out anything particular on here? We don't like to read our slides to you, but we have a lot of, in Rock County, we have the highest ACEs scores in the state of Wisconsin, which means adverse childhood experiences. So of all 72 counties, our county has the highest number of youth with those traumatic experiences, and that includes homelessness, poverty. We know that any community, which is every community that has any kind of drug issue, you're going to have trafficking, because traffickers use alcohol or other drug addiction to control the youth. So if they don't have a previous substance abuse issue, chances are by the time they're finished being trafficked, they will be, because that's a way the trafficker can control them. So again, we have, I've seen this a lot, and Lyle and Scott can talk about this also, but things we know now, even in education, I can look back years ago, and I've seen this one, the change in dress or clothing that's not consistent with what I know the child has access to. So over the years, I can remember girls who all of a sudden, I know that their economic situation is poverty, but all of a sudden their hair's changed, their nails are done, they have beautiful clothing, bags, things like this. And are cell phones on here? Numerous cell phones. When I see more than one cell phone with a youth, I immediately, my antenna goes up. Why do you need 2 phones? Why do you need 3 phones? And those phones are typically used by traffickers, because when I say, I need you to come and do a job, you better be right there to answer that text. Guys, you want to add anything there? No? Kyle?
Just a time here. The second phone's also a way for the trafficker to kind of get their grasp on whoever may be involved. It's a phone that parents typically don't know about, or whoever their parental unit might be at home doesn't know about, so they've got a little more freedom on it. They're not really worried about mom or dad or whoever their guardian is going through that phone. If they don't know about it, they're probably not looking for it, and that youth may be willing to give up what they know, or give up the phone they know exists. They're going to keep that other one hidden. So it's the community, or in this case the educators who are with the youth quite often or most of the time, they're picking up on these things, and they can either alert us, but they may have 2 phones in other locations too. If you're in a public area, you see a child with 2 phones, that's not common behavior. With that said, 2 phones, it could mean a few things. They could have found a phone, but chances are that's not going to be the case. They're holding on to that for some reason, and it's probably to be in contact with somebody.
We see a lot again, this is when you're putting more than 1, 2, 3 of these indicators together that you want to dig a little deeper. But physical trauma, of course, our forensic nurse, who's not with us, but she was in the video, she talks a lot about patients who come in and identify what happened. You know, you have a broken eye socket and you say you just tripped. That's probably not what happened. So we see a lot. It's a very violent world. And so physical trauma, self-harming behaviors. We have a lot of youth who have self-harming behaviors, and that does not necessarily mean that they are in a trafficking situation, but when you put it with other indicators, you might want to, you know, again, as I said, dig deeper, because we have a lot of mental health issues. We've always had mental health issues. We know it's at a real crisis point now, especially since the pandemic, not just for youth, but for adults also. And one thing, the sexually transmitted infections, our nurse will tell you that she has youth that come in repeatedly all the time for the same recurring sexually transmitted infections, because they're with so many partners. You know, your trafficker is going to typically make you do from anywhere from 5 to 30 sex acts a day to make your quota, or his or her quota. And women are a part of this world. Don't think that they're not. Women play with the trafficker. We refer to them as the bottom, and they typically have been trafficked by the trafficker. They might even have children with him. They might even be married with him. But oftentimes women can be much more, seem much safer when they approach a youth on behalf of the trafficker and kind of befriend them and start that grooming process than a trafficker who typically might look like a really scary person. So we have had a couple of those cases which Scott and Lyle will talk about. The branding and tattoos we oftentimes see, and specific tattoos that identify which stable that the person, the male or the female youth belongs to, and that's just a sign to other traffickers that they belong to somebody. And in this area, we typically see more branding, don't we, than the tattoos?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, tattoos are very easy to obtain. People have in-home or at-home kits, and to the youth, hey, I've got a tattoo, it's cool. I mean, it's something that, one, the youth will have additional tattoos typically to go along with whatever the brand may be or the label may be. Essentially, the trafficker views them as property, and that's their way of marketing their property, so others know.
Thank you. Okay, so this is where, especially when we talk to youth, this is where the kids go wild, because they know almost all of these, and these apps change all the time. So especially for your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your own children, this is right now really where the predators really like to play, because they can disguise themselves in a lot of different ways, and they don't present that they're really a 45-year-old man or woman, and they're not a 10-year-old child. So I'm going to let Scott and Lyle talk a little bit more about this, but when our youngest group that we do presentations for are 4th and 5th graders, and they all, when we ask them about these apps, they all will tell you that they've been contacted by somebody they didn't know through an app or a game. Gaming devices are a huge playground for predators to contact youth. You guys want to talk about it?
So I hope that you're seeing some parallels here. This isn't a unique thing just to sex trafficking. You see parallels with domestic violence, with sexual assault, child sexual assault, child abuse. All of these things kind of have similar indicators, and then that's kind of how we as investigators need to then dig into and figure out, okay, what's the overlying crime that's happening here? Like Carrie said, it's very common for predators to reach out to kids And, you know, we've had cases at our, well, even down to our middle school, where someone thinks they're chatting with somebody that is of their age, or maybe a little older, but is a child themselves, and it's maybe they're interested in a romantic relationship, and boy, this looks like it could be really cool, and then it devolves into sending nude photos, and then it gets to the point that there's then extortion involved, like you need to participate in this or I will tell your family, and you need to send me more and more explicit, or I'll destroy your life. And these sometimes 5th and 6th graders have no idea, don't have the capacity to figure out what to do with that. That's the kind of vulnerability that we see, and the kind of evil, I'll say, that some of these traffickers will participate in.
Social media is a very easy way to connect to a lot of different communities. Facebook, great for keeping in contact with friends, family, if you've got it. Flip side of that, the trafficker is on there looking for their destination community, wherever they may be looking at. In the search bar of Facebook, you can type in Janesville or Janesville Middle School, and you're going to get a list of youth or people who associate to a Janesville Middle School, and they can just start going through it that way. They don't have to work very hard to find who they may be targeting, and it's really easy to send a message and find, hey, oh, they responded, all right, I'm gonna chase this trail. And they're very charismatic, they know what to say, how to say it. Social media, depending on how locked down it is, usually with kids, it's open to anybody and everybody to see. That trafficker, before they send their first message, has probably got a pretty good timeline as to, hey, what's happening with this kid, what do they like to talk about, what do they post about, so they can just initiate a conversation and take it from there. Snapchat is another very popular, which is the bottom left corner with the white ghost. That's a very popular app for a lot of youth, but as well as adults. Messages are disappearing typically depending on settings, but by default they're disappearing. The photos are disappearing. So it's very easy to hide conversations, very easy to hide photos, but it's also very easy to just send a mass quantity of photos or messages to potentially unknown people. Again, they've got a search engine in there. You can just search a name or a location and typically come up with something, because again, it's a social media group. It's meant to reach a lot of the population. Traffickers like to use social media because that's what kids are using. As you saw in the video, 12 years old is the average age that youth get into sex trafficking. It's not because they're meeting them on the street at random. They're doing their research, they're using social media, and they're figuring out, hey, how can I start a conversation and befriend them before I end up using them.
And the video mentioned it too, but we also have situations where trafficking, I don't know, tradition might be the wrong word, but for generations we might be dealing with a youth that her grandmother and her mother and her aunts and her sisters had also been trafficked, and that's what the family does to survive. That's how they earn their income. A lot of those youth don't know that that's trafficking. They think they grew up in it. They think this is all we've ever done. And so that can sometimes be difficult to work with those cases when you're questioning their reality, and it can really become hard to work those cases and get cooperation from families like that.
Carrie, the video shows that the average age is 12, but could you speak to how young some of these victims are as well?
Well, we definitely have, Jamie will tell you that her youngest trafficking case was a 2-year-old. And her oldest was a woman who was 64, I believe. So, but we've definitely had youth in our elementary schools, especially in that generational situation, but also with that kind of extended family where Uncle Joe isn't really Uncle Joe, but he's at the house all the time, so that's what we call him. And But he asked me to sit on his lap, and that kind of makes me uncomfortable. And what we always talk to anybody about, if you get that feeling in your stomach that something's wrong, something is wrong. And that is your sixth sense, that's your instinct to protect yourself. And so we really need to listen to our kids when our kids say something doesn't feel right, because something isn't right. I want to tell you one quick story about the video. If you recall, there was a scene of a student, it happened to be a male student, who was leaning against a locker. That was filmed at Craig High School. 2 years ago in the fall, one of my boys, who was at the time a sophomore, he and his friend, who were my students, we talk about this all the time. I talk about this with our students, our student body. But he came to me before school and he was really upset. And now he's a sophomore boy. And he said, "Senora, I really have a problem." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, I've been talking to this girl. She's really, really beautiful." We'll never know if it really was a girl or just images he was seeing. And so we've been talking, and so she's asked me, we've exchanged some pictures, and then she asked me to take a picture of myself performing a sex act, and I did it. And as soon as I did it, just what Scott just talked about, immediately I got a text back that said, "I have these images of you, and I'm gonna send them out unless you send me $500 right now." So he was in, you can imagine, 15, 16 years old, absolute panic. He comes from a very good family, very traditional family. I think his biggest fear was what his mother was going to say or feel or do. And so he said, I had access to my dad's business card, credit card, so I sent the $500. Then he's especially in a panic. So I get him right away to the appropriate administration and our school liaison officer, and we start going through. So that's the sextortion piece. He kept getting messages from this person, "I'm gonna keep sending these out." And quite honestly, that's how traffickers make money. That's the digital trafficking piece. Those images are gone to that student forever, but they're out there forever. And you never know at what point in your life those could reappear. So the good news is, his father, we called the parents into school, and he explained to them what had happened, and the father had gotten a call from his credit card for a suspicious activity. And so he had canceled the transaction, which of course my student could not have possibly known until his father was there. So fortunately, the trafficker did not get the money. However, again, those images are always out there. And I asked him when we made this video in February, I said, "Hey, would you like to be a part of this video since this happened to you?" So that was him in the video. And it's just pretty remarkable, those conversations, if you have a 15-year-old male student who can come to a female teacher and say this kind of really, really disturbing thing that happened. Those are the connections. That's our whole goal here, is to outreach and educate and try to prevent and intervene when things have happened. I'll let you guys talk about this one.
And avoid judgment too. I mean, that's the shame that kicks in that allows these things to go on for too long. That if you establish a trusting relationship with somebody, that they know they can come to you and you won't judge them and make them more shameful. That's what can stop these things in their tracks before they get worse.
And Lyle, would you kind of, without telling names, just share what one of your survivors said to you recently after transporting her a lot?
So our agency worked a case, court Hereford. He was federally indicted and convicted. He received 20 in, 20 out. He's 51, I want to say. So when you're looking at 20 years out from there, 71 before he's eligible for a release potentially. The survivor, we were transporting her from our area up to the federal courthouse so she could do her testifying. And she was nervous, obviously. I mean, it's one of the biggest moments in her life. And she's getting a chance to tell her story and kind of go to bat for herself in front of somebody who's going to ultimately make a decision, or a group of people, which includes the jury and the judge. We got done, she did her testifying, we let her meet up with her mom, who she hadn't seen in a while because she's been in custody. Let her get her hair done. She spent a couple hours with her mom, got her lunch, and then on the way back this way, she's like, I could actually hang out with you guys, you're normal people. So that relationship wasn't created by the officer that I rode with and myself. That was created by Dan Schoonover, who was one of the primary investigators on that case. When Chief Marquardt is talking about trust and judgment, those lines of communication don't happen right away. The youth are in a vulnerable spot. They find themselves in a worse position if a trafficker's got their grasp on them. They're trying to figure out, hey, who can I trust? In Carrie's case, I'm guessing that student, that wasn't the first time you talked to him.
No.
So that was over time, a relationship was built, and he felt comfortable enough to come to her and say, hey, here's what I've got going on. I messed up, can you help me? And that's what these survivors are looking for. I have yet to meet a survivor who says, I want to do this the rest of my life. Before they know it, they're in it so deep, the embarrassment kicks in, the shunning kicks in, they're left in a spot where they don't feel like they can get out, and they're trying to find a relationship that'll help them get out or somebody they can confide in. It could take days, but quite honestly, it's more than likely going to take months or years before that can come forward. And then that's where, if they're willing to and wanting to, law enforcement is able to get involved. The last thing we want to do is force a victim to have to cooperate with us. It just doesn't go well. I don't know if you guys have had arguments or conversations with somebody and you don't feel like talking to them, and then they are continuing to force it. Now imagine that spanned out over the course of years, because that's ultimately what it looks like when the court system gets involved. So it's building relationships, checking in on them, maybe not from the investigative standpoint, but just give them a call or stop by. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? Do you need anything? Show them you're willing to work with them beyond just what they have to offer to you.
And the relationships continue after the court cases are over, because we're just like real people, and we care about these people who have been victimized and like to check in on them and see how they're doing. And we don't get a lot of success stories in law enforcement, but getting somebody out of a sex trafficking situation and allowing them to turn their life around is pretty rewarding when you work those cases. So they're hard to work. It takes a lot of time. Just like Lyle said, that this person that you talked to, any guesses how long Dan worked on that relationship before she actually needed to testify?
I know for sure years.
Yeah.
How long, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's how long these processes take. And they're hard cases to work. And I think we have a slide later about statistics. We don't have a lot of good numbers in Rock County where I can say, here's the number of sex trafficking cases that we have. We've had some really good ones and some really good investigations that have ended up in some significant federal and state time for suspects. Most of the cases that we try to work never end up in trial. Sometimes they never end up in charges, and sometimes that's just because the victim is so deep into their situation that they don't find a way out, and they remain in that, and then cases evaporate if we don't have witnesses to work with. So that becomes one of the hard parts when somebody says, well, how many trafficking cases do we have in Rock County? Can't really say, because we don't know. And we know the cases that we're working, we don't know the ones that we don't know about.
And we know the hundreds of hours law enforcement, and again, all of our law enforcement agencies, particularly Beloit, Milton, Janesville, are really heavily involved with our work. Our smaller communities, Clinton, is also part of the task force just for manpower. They're just not always at our meetings as often, but we know they have cases that we all connect and collaborate with. But so keeping track of hours worked, hundreds and hundreds of hours, kind of what our law enforcement is doing, as opposed to just the specific how many convictions do we get because of the reasons that Scott talked about. So you can find us on Facebook, and we're very, very active in our community. We have partnered with a lot. We've been very fortunate. When we first started the task force, we were literally all pitching in our own money to make banners and things. Those first banners were really pitiful looking. But we have been really fortunate to have organizations that have sponsored us. We have an event coming up with Budget Truck and Auto in June, and we have become their charitable organizations. The Ladies Riverside Golf Invitational for the last 3 years has sponsored us with 1649 and the YWCA Care House. And we have been able to do some things like Lyle talked about. We've been able to provide resources for survivors, plane tickets out of Wisconsin back home, dental work through HealthNet for a survivor who testified, who had a lot of dental trauma from drugs and also physical abuse. And so we've been, everything that we make goes back into, or that's donated, goes back into the community, whether it's for our students, our survivors, it's education. And so we are just very grateful for you for letting us have the time to share this information. It's a hard topic to talk about. And we do, we like here at the end just to open it up if you're comfortable to ask questions. We'd love for you to. We'll stick around a few minutes also to, if you want to talk to us individually. Yes, sir.
Early on in your presentation, you had mentioned that Rock County was at or near the top on number of cases. Is that a hard number or a percentage per capita?
That, I was speaking specifically about risk factors for youth of adverse childhood experiences. So our youth who've experienced trauma at a very high rate, our youth are the most vulnerable in the state. That was really what I meant. Now I will say Wisconsin consistently is in the top 5 in the country for trafficking because of our location. And we're very close to Chicago. Milwaukee, and I'm just going to use the language that's used in this, Milwaukee is known as the pimp capital of the United States. There's actually a school you can go to in Milwaukee to learn how to be a trafficker. And we don't like to use the word pimp because it kind of glorifies it, so we use trafficker. And so it's, you know, we're right next to Rockford, that second to Chicago has the highest trafficking in Illinois. So we're on this corridor where we have easy access. And our rural communities, people have sometimes a false sense of security about safety in our rural communities. Traffickers are very, very active and very, you know, again, through that social media piece, you can contact youth and start luring them in, grooming them, offering them things that they need for physical or emotional comfort. Do we have any other questions? Yes, sir.
Terry, as a former high school teacher, I had a lot of kids come to me. How do you get parents to listen to the kids?
That's a great question. I can tell you even from experience with students having come to me who've been sexually assaulted by, in one particular case, another student at the high school. That piece for them falls into that same category of the shame and embarrassment that they feel that they did something wrong when really they're the one being victimized. So every time a youth comes to me that's willing to tell me something and willing to trust me, the hard part is to say, okay, I now have to take you to this person. We have to involve the police in this. Do you trust me? Because that's what we have to do now. And I just think that the more we talk openly and just plainly and not sensationally about these topics, anything related to the violence or sexual assault, sexual abuse, we just give our kids they know that there's somebody safe out there who's not going to, as soon as they tell me, I'm not going to abandon them. And neither is Scott, neither is Lyle. So we're in it for the long haul with them. But I know I've even heard Scott say before in his law enforcement career, there are things probably 10 years ago that he saw in a different way that he didn't see what was potentially maybe trafficking.
And I touched on it earlier, we also talked about ACEs. These are generational issues. So a child experiencing trauma to that extent probably has parents who also have trauma, and probably have grandparents who also had a history of trauma. The adverse childhood experiences are passed down. And so then to go to a parent who has a history of trauma and try to engage them, maybe they don't have the capacity to help their child because of what they've been through, and then they come across as uncooperative and not willing to listen. So that's some of what we face in these investigations.
What are you talking about? Mostly about incest relationships then, or?
Could be anything. I mean, incest is just one of those things, one of those adverse childhood experiences. It could be domestic violence, it could be unstable housing, it could be substance abuse. I mean, that whole list that we showed up there earlier, you know, that's happening to babies that are born into houses in Rock County. And that sets them up for vulnerability just like their parents and grandparents were. And to try to stop that cycle is something that I mean, we all try to do. I mean, you all try to do by coming here and learning about this.
Well, you want to share your insight on the Johns about what we need to do as a community on that end, what you shared at the library? Our issue is how do we stop people from purchasing?
Yeah, let's stop the demand.
Obviously, first and foremost is from the victim or survivor standpoint, depending on how you're looking at it, the shaming side. The survivors don't come forward because they feel shame over what's going on. In most cases, I can't speak to every single human trafficking case because I don't know every single one. In all ones that I'm aware of, that I've either assisted with or at least had conversations about, there's drugs involved. I'm talking cocaine or crack cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, the hard drugs, those are directly involved. The Johns, typically, there's somebody who, they're providing the money at the end of the day. They're the ones who are providing it. So the public shaming aspect of it is helpful. That usually comes from stings that get set up or undercover operations that are run. Those have been run in the past by our local area, and that it has included as Carrie talked about earlier, the other stakeholders that are involved in this, other agencies, other jurisdictions, depending on where they're coming from. With I-90 running right through Janesville, it's very easy to come and go, as Carrie talked about, up from Chicago. If you want to, most people when they travel, they want to get there the quickest way possible, and typically that's the interstate. So when you've got something that somebody or most people are going to travel on, that's where the hubs are going to be. It's the hotels right off the interstate. It's easy on and off. They travel from a fair distance to get there because they don't want to do it or meet up with somebody typically right where they're from. They don't want someone they know seeing them go into a hotel. They don't want someone they know seeing them walking out of a hotel. So typically they're going to travel as well. They can be just as charismatic. They are using different websites. They're looking for ads to contact who we identify as the survivors, but the traffickers themselves are the ones offering quote-unquote protection, and all they're doing is making sure their money's made and setting up the next date for them. The phone numbers, through our investigations, we can track phone numbers and postings and there's a database that we use. In that database, we can actually track where these phone numbers that are being used to contact for a John uses to contact. The number that's being contacted, we can see where it's posting at, how often it's posting there, how recently it's posting there, and kind of track behavior as well and show kind of, hey, they're traveling east to west coast, they're traveling from the north to the south, whatever it may be, we're able to track that with the software we've got as law enforcement. It's not available to the general public, obviously, but it's something to help further our investigations and figure out, hey, where are our survivors going to be, and how can we intervene and hopefully assist them in getting out. Part of that too is a willingness to get out. Like anything, I don't know how many people have kids, you can't force your kid to eat broccoli, but when they're ready to eat it, they're going to. So the same goes with trafficking. You can't force somebody out of it. They have to be wanting to, and when they're ready, help them, listen to them, figure out what they need, because they're gonna need a lot of support because they just lost what they were used to.
So again, I know we're running out of time here. Oh,
Question?
Being a member of the community, I'm assuming, first off, we need to understand what's going on and how we can be involved. The first question I would have is, what are the red flags to look for, and then how to utilize that to inform the proper authorities of the situation?
So if you think about your circle, whether it's grandchildren or your grandchildren or your children's friends, if you start seeing changes in the youth, maybe they start becoming isolated, or maybe they start having things that they didn't have before, anything material for their appearance. If you start having a lot of somebody that you know, or your grandchild or your child knows, who suddenly starts missing school a lot, any of those changes, those might be kind of subtle or even dramatic changes in appearance, for a positive or a negative, those can all be things that if you're looking, ladies, when you're getting your nails done, if all of a sudden you see a new woman in there with a younger girl perhaps, like, that's not, I know where I go to get my nails done, it's the same ladies there all the time. If somebody showed up that was different, I would notice that. So anything that looks different in a child's life, and you start seeing changes, those are things to just be aware of. And I will tell you that our law enforcement would always rather get a call that turns out to be nothing than to not get a call. So even the P3 app, I just had a conversation with students at Craig just on Friday with my students about, if you see something, say something if you're not sure. So that would really be the first step. It's really just that lens. Now that when you leave here, you might notice something different that you want to maybe pay a little bit more attention to. That's really, there's no one set answer to your question, but it's those subtle changes that you can start seeing that could be indicators.
In being around this number of years that I have, significant weight loss, cuts, bruising, fractures, things that normally wouldn't be in place for that child.
So we thank you again very much. We'll stick around here a few minutes if you have other questions for us, but we thank you very much for inviting us, and have a blessed Sunday.
Thank you so much.